Hi everyone, Dave here at East Rosebud Fly and Tackle in Billings, Montana. Today we're going to do the infamous Copper John. John Barr developed this pattern back in the 1990s, early 1990s, and two things made this pattern possible. One was the advent of ultrawire in the different colors and the different sizes. The other was the UV cured epoxy that makes this fly so easy to tie. We used to have to use 5-minute epoxy, and you wasted an awful lot of it trying to get your fly tied in time, getting the epoxy on. And we used to have to strip wire from electrical transformers to get small enough wire. And now with ultrawire, those issues are all gone. So I'm going to tie actually a dual wire Copper John. The procedure is exactly the same as if you tied a single wire Copper John. The red Copper John is Umpqua's best-selling fly, so that tells you how popular it is. But I'm going to tie this with two different colors wires. I'm going to use a brassy golden olive and a small amber. If you were using just one wire on this size hook, which is a size 14, 2x long nymph hook, then you would use a medium wire. So this is a Fulling Mill 5080. It's a 2x long nymph hook. This is a size 12. You can tie these Copper Johns down to 14 and 16, but the 12s and 14s are the most effective sizes. And then for a bead, I am using a copper 7/64 brass bead. Of course, you can certainly use tungsten if you want the other extra weight. One thing nice about the Copper John is between the weighted underbody, the bead, and the wire abdomen, this fly sinks very quickly. It's an excellent fly to use in fast water situations. It's also an excellent fly to use as your point fly on a 2-fly nymph rig. So what I'm going to start off with here is I'm going to wrap the lead underbody. I should have slightly larger wire, but we'll make do with this. 0.020 wire would be ideal on this size. And after you've wrapped it, simply pinch it off and make sure you have your ends wrapped nice and tight. And then we'll shove it up against the bead. Now, I used Vivas thread on this. The original pattern calls for UTC thread, and UTC thread is certainly fine. It allows you to wrap a nice, smooth underbody, and that's important on this fly. We're going to start our thread right behind the lead, and we're going to make a nice tapered cone up to the lead. Don't try to do it all in one place. Come forward, come back. Make a nice tapered cone until you get to the end of the shank. Now the tails are brown goose biot, and I'll show you a very effective and easy way to tie these in both at the same time. When you take your biot off the quill, I like to always pull it off with tweezers. It gives me the extra length. And what we're going to do is the first biot I pick up, I'm going to have the tail curving away from me. The second biot I pick up, I'll have the curl towards me, and then simply cross them in your fingers like so. And you can slide them back and forth to get them parallel, and make sure that they're the same length and parallel down the entire side. Well, typically the tail is about half a shank length on this. So I'm going to hold it at my tie-in point. Again, making sure that they're still parallel. I'm going to straddle the hook with these and keep them slightly on my side of the hook. So they're right above the hook, tilted slightly to my side. The first thread wrap is fairly soft. Then bring it down. That snugs those biots down against the hook. It also brings them down evenly. Make 2 or 3 more wraps going forward, and you end up with nicely divided tails. So it doesn't take much practice to be able to do that well, and it's certainly easier than trying to do them separately. So we're going to wind up to about the base of our thread wrap dam, cut our biot butts off, and continue a nice smooth taper. At this time, you want to look at your taper and make sure that you've got it nice and smooth. And then we're going to bring our thread up to about midway over where we have our lead tied down. Again, if you were using a single wire, I would recommend the medium size for this size hook. For a 2-wire fly, and we have some commercially tied flies with 2 wires like the Montana Prince that they don't use 2 different sizes, but I think the effect is much better. It gives a more depth to the fly, a more of a 3D effect, and it's really no more difficult to tie than a single wire fly. So we cut off about 6 inches of each wire. Get your wire ends. And we want to get them side by side and get the ends even. Don't use your good scissors to cut this wire, ever. Use tungsten carbide scissors, or simply just get your fingers and even up the butt ends. Then we're going to tie these on my side of the hook, laying side by side, right where the thread is hanging, and then overwrap them with nice tight wraps all the way back to the butt of the tails. Keep your wraps smooth, keep them tight, and make sure you get all the way back to where your tails are. I like to give that an extra wrap right at that location. I'm going to untwist my thread to flatten it. As I come back forward, I want to keep that abdomen smooth. The reason is that if you have a lumpy, bumpy abdomen, it's going to show through when you wrap your wire. We'll bring our thread back forward. Okay, so as you can see, I've got a nice smooth abdomen there. Now I'm going to take both wires at the same time, bring them straight towards me, and then straight 90 degrees out the other side. Now the first couple of wraps, the wires will try to separate on you. So you'll have to use the point of your scissors and just push them together. You want a nice tight body here. Once you get a couple of wraps in, they'll wrap just like a ribbon, nice and flat. As you wrap, keep your wire tipped slightly towards the back of the fly. That way each wrap of wire will slide off the face of the previous wraps and give you a nice smooth body. Hopefully you can see on the camera how this is developing. These 2 colors really add some depth and some interesting segmentation. This is probably my favorite golden stone nymph pattern with these 2 colors. It has a remarkable resemblance to the highly colored golden stones. We're going to continue to wrap this wire up over our lead wire until we get to where our thread is hanging. Now bring your wire to the far side of the hook. Make 3 tight thread wraps. And then for this, I'll simply take 1 wire. It makes no difference which one. Keep your thread tight. That gives an anchor point for you to break your wire off. If your thread is loose, the wire will want to unwrap on you. All right. So there we are so far. Now we're going to put in, I've tried a lot of different materials for the flash on the back of this fly, and the best by far is holographic silver Flashabou. This really makes that wing case pop when you put the epoxy over the top. So we'll get a single strand here. If you can, turn the fly towards you slightly so that you can see straight over the back. And we're simply going to put the butt end of this Flashabou up against the bead and tie this down with thread going forward towards the bead and keeping this strip of Flashabou right on top of the hook shank. Alright, we'll get this out of the way. Next we're going to use some black thin skin for the actual shell back. You want a piece of thin skin that's about as wide as the hook gap on your fly. You don't need very much, and whatever you do, when you cut a strip of thin skin, do not peel it all off of the cardboard backing at once or it'll do this to you. I just simply cut off 1.5 inches or so at a time as I need it and leave it adhered to the cardboard backing. That way it will not make a mess on you. So I'll Cut off a strip here. Now we're simply going to make sure that the butt end of it is square. We're going to lay that right at the back of the bead, right on top of the fly. Make sure it's centered on top. I like to make my first wrap fairly soft to kind of gather that down, and then make tight wraps, adjoining wraps as you go back, keeping your thin skin on top of the hook. And you want to make sure that you go back to cover the end of your wire wraps. If you stop short of that, you're going to have a gap when you pull your thin skin over. So I like to get my thin skin back to about the 60% point on the hook shank. Alright, next, underneath the thin skin, we're going to be using some Peacock Herl. I like to use nice dense peacock. This is an eyed stick, and we're going to use, let's see, about 6 of these. You can never use too much peacock. If you try to skimp on it, you're going to be down at the butt ends of the quill where there's no herl, and it'll show in your fly. Alright, so I've got a half a dozen herls now. We're simply going to roughly align the tips. They don't have to be perfect since we're going to be cutting about 1 inch off. If you try to tie in the tips themselves, they're so fragile and they'll usually break on the first wrap. So cut about 1.5 inches off the tips and lay the butt ends, the cut ends, right behind the bead, and wrap over them with your thread going forward till you're right behind the bead. Now I'll give this peacock just about a half a turn, a half a twist. You don't need to do more than that or you'll break it. And we want nice, tight, adjoining wraps all the way up tight to the bead. Now anytime you have a wing case, no matter what the material is, make sure that you cut any under material off anywhere but the top of the fly. I like to cut it on the side away from me. The reason being, any little stobs of that Peacock Herl or anything else that you use that stick up, when you bring a wing case over, particularly something like turkey quill, it will invariably punch through that quill. So always tie your materials off on the sides if at all possible. Alright, now we're going to tie in some rubber legs. The original pattern calls for some hen hackle for legs. I like to use the rubber legs for motion. I'm going to make one single turn and come over into the middle of my peacock. Then I'm using these centipede legs. This is a tan and brown combo, which I think looks nice. And we're simply going to tie in the far leg first by holding it slightly towards the top of the fly. One wrap of thread will bring it down to the side. Another wrap of thread will lock it in, and then you can cut them off. I like to keep them about hook shank length. They're a little shorter. Do the same on your side, except bring the rubber leg down because the thread torque will want to bring it up. And you can always adjust these, of course. And a second wrap will tighten everything down. Now to cover up my thread wraps, I'm going to use a product called Arizona Synthetic Dubbing. They make several different colors. This happens to be peacock, and it's wonderfully effective at imitating real peacock. A little bit of dubbing wax here, and all we really need is about a turn and a half to cover up our thread wraps. And we're just going to make one complete wrap. The second one we're going to bring around underneath the legs and directly behind the bead. Alright, almost finished here. We'll bring our thin skin over the top, keep it in the middle of the fly, take one wrap of thread, make sure you don't get your rubber legs tangled in there. And as you pull it down, pull it firmly so that you dent that thin skin like that. Then bring your holographic Flashabou right over the top, it's dead center, Make one wrap exactly where you made your wrap for your thin skin. Now fold your holographic Flashabou back and make one wrap going back towards the back of the fly over the Flashabou. This helps to lock the Flashabou down, and then make a final wrap going back forward immediately behind the bead. Also, and I found this by experience, when you cut off your thin skin, it's not difficult to cut off your Flashabou also, which means the entire thorax has to be redone. So when you cut off your Flashabou, try not to cut it all the way down. Leave just a small bit, 30/2 of an inch of a tag end. It'll be hidden by the thin skin. Okay, then I finally like to make one more thread wrap over the thin skin, over the Flashabou. To cut this thin skin off as close to the bead as I can, I like to use these curved cuticle scissors. The main point is you just want to use very sharply pointed scissors and just nick that off as close as you can. And the little trick with the holographic Flashabou will usually save you from cutting that as well and having to redo your fly. So right now it looks simple like that. Now we're just going to whip finish over the top of that. Again, make sure you don't have your legs in the way. Hold our legs back and make a 3-wrap whip finish immediately behind the bead. Okay, now what really makes this fly pop is the UV resin. I'm using Loon product. This is the thick. And all you need to do, now the nice thing about this UV cure is you have an infinite cure time. You can leave this on as long as you need to. You can push it around with the tip of the applicator. You can use your bodkin and push it around. What you need to do, the 2 key areas is you want to make sure that you have some of this on the wire at the abdomen. As you go over the thorax, cover it from side to side, and make sure you have some over the bead when you finally take it away. Those are your 2 anchor points. If you do not use those anchor points, the very first fly that takes this will pull your entire thorax off. So this is like honey. It's very thick. You can, like I say, you can use the applicator and just push it around. I like to cover my entire thin skin back. Make sure I have a little bit on the bead, a little bit on the wire itself. And you have, like I say, a generous amount of time to work with that, to push it around. Then just any UV light, and this stuff is amazing. Within a few seconds, it's solid as rock. Every time I use this, I still touch it to make sure that I'm not seeing things. You end up with an ultra clear thorax. That Flashabou pops through there, and the reason for that is many mayfly and caddisfly pupas, as they emerge from the bottom of the stream, they have a bubble of air that they've exuded between their exoskeleton and their outer skeleton, and that bubble of air is very, very obvious, and this simulates that. So if you haven't tried any Copper Johns, you need to. It's a super fly. It's a fantastic fish getting fly any time of the year. I think it's an excellent stonefly imitation, and remember, the stoneflies are there year-round in all sizes. Thanks for joining in. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to contact us. We'll see you next time.